We're going to continue to study through the Gospel of Mark, and this passage is a little different. It seems a little darker than other passages. It's not focused on Jesus a whole lot, although we're going to talk about what it looks like in a relationship with Jesus, but most of Mark, like 99% of the Gospel of Mark, is focused on Jesus' life and Jesus' teaching and his ministry. And Jesus just seems to be absent in this passage. And it's a little odd, too. It's about a man being beheaded. And if you ever think like the Bible is boring, you're skipping these kinds of passages. Because when I read this passage, it's not boring. And it makes me just wonder, like, why is this included in the Bible? Especially when it's sandwiched in between some stories of Jesus sending the disciples to go do his work. And then after this story, the disciples are coming back. And so Mark pauses and is like, hey, by the way, John the Baptist was killed. And here's the account of his death. And I'm going to spend more time telling the account of his death more than John the Baptist's actual ministry. And it just makes you wonder, like, why is that in there? Like, why do we have verses 14 through 29? We're in Mark chapter 6, verses 14 through 29. Why are there this many verses that is focused on this death? And so as we read it, my hope is that we'll be able to connect some dots here, and that you can see the reason why he does this. And so my hope is that we would be able to reflect on our own lives as we read this and see maybe how sometimes we act like the bad guy, which in this case is Herod. And so I want to begin with verses 14 and 15. Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 14. Right before this, by the way, if you look back, context is always helpful. If you look back, Jesus has sent out the 12 disciples to continue the ministry that Jesus was doing. Says, take these things, go and spread the gospel. And so they're going out and they're healing sick people. And this is where we pick up. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said he's Elijah, and still others claimed he's a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. And we see, as we're about to study this passage, we're going to see that John the Baptist, as we read about John the Baptist's arrest and as we read about the death, this is kind of a preview. I want you to pay attention, especially if you're familiar with the story of Jesus' death. I want you to pay attention to similarities between John the Baptist's death and Jesus' death. And before we get into this, though, I want to just talk about King Herod. So there's a family, what do you call it? Family map, family diagram. Family tree, there you go. I like that. Such fancy words, Anders. Family tree. You can see Herod the Great up there. And so there's also, you'll notice when you look at these, the Herod family is kind of a disaster. Like Herod the Great had, I think it was 8 wives. He had a bunch of sons named Herod. And so when you read like Herod in the Gospels, most of the time it's talking about not Herod the Great, but Herod Agrippa on the bottom there. And this is the Herod we're talking about. And so Herod the Great, if you read through Jesus' birth and read about some guy that wanted to kill all the 2-year-old male babies, basically to kill Jesus, to make sure that, you know, he doesn't do his thing. That's Herod the Great, so great guy. And then you've got his family, which is also just as great as him. It's kind of a mess, and we'll see this King Herod. It says king, he's not an actual king, though. And so he's kind of ruling over a territory, but he's not, this is kind of a description of who he is, not necessarily a specific title, right? And so King Herod heard about this. King Herod is worried about, you know, he wants to be king, he wants to rule over everything, and you got not only this Jesus guy, but you've got him sending 12 other people to go and do these miraculous things. And Jesus' name had become well known. And so people were saying, well, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, which when we read about John the Baptist, that's actually a huge kudos to John the Baptist, because that means John the Baptist's ministry is closely tied and doing the same kinds of things that Jesus was doing. And so that's big encouragement to John the Baptist. So some say John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That's why there's miraculous powers. Others said he's Elijah. Others said he's a prophet. Elijah in the end of the Old Testament, it was predicted that he would return in Malachi. So if you like taking notes, looking at Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6 of the prediction of Elijah, and that when Elijah would come back, there would be the work. It would mark the beginning of a new era. And so it's like, okay, is Elijah? This is Elijah. He's a prophet. What's going on? And so there's rumors spreading. People are talking, and there's some buzz about Jesus. Verse 16, but when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, though, that means John, who his head was cut off, I had him killed, has been raised from the dead. And then we're going to get this description of why he beheaded John. So verse 17, for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. Last week, we were talking about emotionally healthy relationships in our course, and we were talking about family and how families can take place in our own families and affect us in ways that that we weren't aware of. And there's no doubt that this happened with Herod's family. You've got this just mess of a family of not necessarily caring about God's law, and you have Herod going to Rome on a trip. And now there's also, depending on the scholars you read, if you read commentaries, some will say this is actually his brother. Some of them say, well, no, this is a different Philip, because there's a lot of similar names. And so I wouldn't get too caught up with this, but in the NIV it says he did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he'd married. So Herod went on a trip, fell in love with his brother's wife. His brother's wife left Philip and came and married Herod, which people didn't necessarily think that was the greatest thing in the world, and so he was in hot water, right? And so we're just kind of getting a little more glimpse of who this Herod guy is, and the messiness of his life. And so we get this account of Herod had John arrested, Herod had John beheaded. So why did this take place? And this is where we get a glimpse into what was going on in his life. Verse 18, for John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. John sounds like a stand-up guy. He cares about God's law. And there's a couple passages, Leviticus 18:16 and Leviticus 20:21, that he's speaking to about not committing adultery and taking your brother's wife. But John talks to this guy in power and says, hey, this isn't lawful. And he's talking about this is not lawful, like as it relates to God's law. And so Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. She wasn't able to, though, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. John stands up to a man in power. It's not lawful. You're not following God's law. You shouldn't be doing this. And so the wife nursed a grudge against John, said, hey, you don't tell us how to live our lives. You don't tell us that this isn't lawful. And so she wants to kill him. But you've got Herod, and pay attention to what Herod thinks of John. Herod feared John and protected him. He also knew him to be a righteous and holy man. When you think of Jesus' death and you think of the way that it was going about and how people were pressuring Jesus to be killed, and you have Pilate, kind of hesitant, You have people, we have these two similarities where the person in charge is hesitant. It's like, okay, well, is this actually the right thing to do? Like, should I actually kill this man? Because John is righteous and John is holy. Again, big kudos to John. And when Herod heard John, he liked to listen to him. Makes me think back to the parable of the sower. You guys remember us talking through the parable of the seed landing on the different kinds of soil. And I want to read this again, and I want you to try to pinpoint what kind of soil does Herod have in this passage. So this is what Jesus said. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, actually, I'm going to read his interpretation. That might be better. Chapter 4, verse 14. Actually, 15. Sorry, I'm all over the place. Some people, he says, the farmer sows the word, and some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word at once and receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. What kind of soil do you think Herod had? What was his condition of his heart? Which soil would you say his heart was in this passage as we read it? Any thoughts? Okay, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody disagree? It was like, it's a good soil. He's producing lots of fruit. Yeah, he liked to listen to John. He hears the words and he hears the word of God, it seems like gladly. It's like, oh, this sounds nice. But it never takes root. And so it could be the rocky, right, or thorns come and choke out when he experiences worries. And we can see this story and we can read about this Herod, about being this monster of a man. Yet we can see throughout this passage that he experiences the same kinds of things that we experience. He has someone coming in and telling him about the sin that he has in his life and that he shouldn't sin anymore, that it's not lawful. This is contradictory to who God is and what he wants for you. And you have his wife, nursing a grudge, and so now he's in this place of like, okay, like I actually like what John says, but I've also got other people in my life that they don't necessarily appreciate what he says, and so I don't know what to do. And so you can Herod's not this monster like I'm out to go get everybody, but he clearly cares about his position. He clearly cares about power, and all these situations outside of him that are happening start causing him to start thinking through like, okay, well, how do I respond to this? And so we see Herod, John is righteous, he's holy, like listening to him. Let's keep on reading. Verse 21, finally, the opportune time came. Herod's birthday. He's got a birthday, and he has a banquet for his high officials, his military commanders, and the leading men of Galilee. All the important people are here at his birthday party. And the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, and she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. If you read through scholars, some argue if it was like a sexual kind of dance or if it was just because she was a princess. And, it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It can read different ways depending on the version that you have. The reality is that you have this daughter that's dancing, and the dinner guests are impressed with what's going on with this girl. And so the king, caring about what other people think, caring about all these high officials, the king says to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. Verse 23, and he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you. up to half my kingdom, which is a little ironic because he actually doesn't have a kingdom. He's got a small territory. But I'll give it to you up to half my kingdom. I'm going to impress these high officials. I'm going to impress everybody, and they're clearly impressed with you. And so, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you anything up to half my kingdom. And she goes out and says to her mom, well, what should I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. And at once the girl hurried into the king with the request. I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Again, if you think the Bible is boring, there's stories like these that it's just like, okay, this is a little out there, especially with Mark's like, hey, and Jesus is going around and healing people, and he's talking about family, and he's sending people out to do these things and to spread the gospel. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, this thing happened, and it's a pretty messed up story. Whatever you ask, he says, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. And she says, I want you to cut off John the Baptist's head, and I want his head served on a platter. So now Herod's in a predicament where he's got to figure out, I just promised an oath saying that I'd give you whatever you ask. And she asked for this. And so what do? How do you decide what you do in that moment? Because you made a promise. And you've got all the important people around you seeing this happen, saying, oh, okay, you just promised that, and she just said this is what she wants, and so now what kind of guy are you? Do you live up to your promises? The king was greatly distressed, next verse in 26. The king was greatly distressed, as you can imagine, because he's in this difficult position. But because of his oaths, and because of his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. And so he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison that Herod put him in the prison. He had him beheaded, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl. She gave it to her mother. And on hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. And then immediately after this, Mark just keeps on telling the story about how the apostles gathered around Jesus, and we read about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And so it just makes you wonder, like, why is this kind of story in Scripture? And why is it here? Because you have, right before this, last week you may have, if you were here, you heard me talking about this Mark, this sandwich technique that he uses where he tells one story, and in the middle of the story, he inserts something. And so you've got Jesus doing his ministry, and he sends his 12 disciples, and his name is becoming known. And then there's this pause to talk about John the Baptist being beheaded. And then right after this, you have the disciples returning, and Jesus' ministry continues. Any ideas of, like, why is this story here? Anybody have any thoughts? Yeah, Nicholas? Okay, that's good.
Well, he was talking about how John was dead and he had been raised. If the king was thinking he was raised from the dead, so maybe he thought he needed to explain that.
Yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts?
I think it also mentions, makes you think about your word and your oath. It's like, be careful what you promise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a perfect example we see throughout the gospel of here's all the things you should do, and here's Jesus teaching all the things that we should be doing. And then you've got this really clear example of like, and by the way, this happened, and this is a perfect example of what not to do. Right? And you see the dangers, to Nicholas's point, you see the dangers of what can happen if you're speaking out against someone with power. You see that it could go horribly. John ended up sacrificing his life because he spoke against somebody in power. And it wasn't like, hey, by the way, you're doing a bad job as a king. It was like, hey, no, this is what God's law is, and you're not following God's law, and so I'm going to speak against that. And so we have this example of, yes, what it looks like as the disciples are going out, as we think about what our lives look like, as we hope with our vision making Jesus visible in Anoka, as we speak into things or as we speak against things, we can see in Jesus' life people reacted and he got rejected, right? And we see in this instance, John the Baptist, first, he was for real. Like we read about how he was, he said, I must become less and I must decrease and Jesus must increase. We see that to the day he dies. It's like, no, I'm going to live this out. And people even see, you can tell he lived it out well because they thought that this might have been John the Baptist raised from the dead. And so what a great example of what it looks like to share the good news and to put your life on the line. But I also think it's a warning because we can be like Herod. I hope none of us get to a point where we're, commanding people to be killed. But we can see ourselves in Herod in that, like, he did actually enjoy what John the Baptist said. It did actually interest him. It's like, oh, I like listening to him. He has some good things. But you have all the pressures around you. For Herod, it's like, I actually care more about my power and the position and my reputation more than actually following God's law. And so we see this warning of what can happen. We can be put in situations. He's just saying, I want to impress these people. Okay, girl, I'm going to give you whatever you ask for. He did not think, I wouldn't think he would have thought like, oh yeah, by the way, I want John the Baptist beheaded. Like that had to just come out of left field for him. But you find yourself, you make these little decisions over and over again about this is how I'm going to prioritize my life. This is how I'm going to do this. And all of a sudden you do find yourself in a situation. It's like, oh, well, I just promised something and you just asked me something that I probably shouldn't do. So what am I going to do? And we find ourselves in situations where you have to make that line. And we see in Herod's family, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. My hope for us as we read this story is that it's a warning for us and for us to reflect and say, is there parts of my life that is like Herod's life? That if someone confronts me about my sin, how will I respond? The people around me, am I trying to impress them versus following God? Am I willing to give up that reputation in order to follow God? Am I willing to give up the things that are important to me in order to glorify God? This true repentance, John the Baptist was preaching repentance to people. And it's ironic that we see the way that he dies is because someone refused to be truly repentant. And so my hope is that we would be people that we would remain, our hearts would remain soft, and that we would be open to God transforming our lives and to working in us. And if you're not giving things up that you don't want to give up, my guess is that you're not truly following God wholeheartedly. If you have not sacrificed things, whether that's time, whether it's relationships, whether that's your sin habits, whether it's the language that you have, whether it's the life that you choose to live, if your whole life you look back, it's like, no, my life has basically been the same, I would challenge you to think, then what does it look like for you to truly pick up your cross, deny yourself, and follow Jesus? Because I don't want us to be people like Herod, where we find ourselves in situations, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to filter this through what I want and what will be most beneficial to me. And my hope is that we would seek God's heart.